and assisting with helping record me for this session. This is my first conference since graduating from my master's degree program, so I really appreciate being in this setting with all my peers. As I said, I just graduated from the University of North Texas, so if anybody has any difficulty with my accent, if I throw out a y'all in there, just please stick with me and we'll get through it together. So this happens to be a quote. This is our go-to quote at my university, our program, coming from Herbert Simon, the design philosopher, wherein the reason for design, because one of the topics that have come up commonly in this conference over the past couple of days is why do designers interject themselves into these healthcare situations? And so this is kind of our design philosophy, if you will. Design is changing existing situations into preferred ones, and that's where I see my role, and I'm sure all of you see your role in our immersion into this healthcare environment. So I'd like to discuss today for this project, we're going to be talking about an excerpt from my thesis, and before I get to that, I'd like to give you a little bit of background on myself personally. My undergraduate degree was in apparel design. I went to Parsons School of Design in Paris and spent all good 20 years in the field designing products. I often like to tell my first-year students that garment design is like being in the military, designing t-shirts, see the world. And so I had some great experiences interacting with people of many different cultures. And as you move through any industry, you start to become very specialized. And in particular, I started to specialize in children's wear. And so when I came to my graduate program, I wanted to continue that interest, but extend it in a new way. Typical fashion programs, master's programs, are focused on sustainability issues. And I wanted to see what else can we do in this arena. And I became very interested in the emerging field of wearable technology. And in particular, there were two inspirations for me. One was from a colleague who were at Parsons School of Design in their master's program, who was a diabetic patient and happened to be designing these high-end insulin pump injectors. There were some beautiful jewelry type items, scarves and floral arrangements. And at the same time, we've been talking about looking back, and I was doing a design criticism on the Band-Aid and looking at how Band-Aids as a medical device have actually evolved over time stylistically with fashion and trend. And I was looking at a most recent iteration of the Band-Aid in their partnership with Disney and how they had come up with a logo system using the Muppets movie characters where the child could turn an owie into a wowie. So the child would then flash their Band-Aid at their parent's mobile device, and it would prompt this game technology. And so I thought, here's two really fantastic ideas, and how can we merge them into an opportunity to make children happy? And again, coming from garments I thought were the perfect place to do it. Typically, garments are used for protection. They're also used to communicate our identity. So that was where my starting point, if you will, in this journey that we were going on. And so with that in mind, it's not just an artifact, though. It would have to exist in a system. It's not just a garment like this, a health sensory monitoring system, is not just the component itself, but how that data is going to interact with the mobile technology when it communicates to the parents, and how that's going to communicate to the teacher, the extended family of caregivers, as well as the primary care physician. And so kind of incorporating Bruno Latour's actor network theory and looking at how that information could come back to the user as well and be responsive and customized so that the child can understand fluctuations in their health, as well as the parent and the teacher know how to respond to those issues, but also empowering for the child so they become more familiar with when I get into a situation like a test or extreme stressful situation in the sports activities, how that might affect me. So that led me to another aspect of my design mantra, is that design advocacy. So using participatory design, and I particularly like this one from Dana Tapak. She's an interior designer who is also looking at how can we design for children with chronic illness. She's looking at the built environment. But this idea that don't speak about us without us, and that really became important to me in my approach to how I wanted to design these products. You know, in critical design, and especially in the fashion world, coming from where I'm from, is that designers come up with these products and these trends, and then it's given to the public and we get user feedback. But I felt that that would not make a biomedical product meaningful for the user. If you want adherence to a medical regimen, it's got to be meaningful. They want to be interested in order to incorporate it into their lifestyle. And so, in thinking about both form and function, what is this product going to look like? What is it going to do? What do we need? And really taking in mind that these are digital natives. They have a different worldview than you or I because they've been immersed in this ubiquitous technology. And so they have a different set of expectations in how to interact with those devices. In addition to that, in working with children, there's additional barriers in how we communicate. You can't just go into a standard interview and say, "Hi Johnny, I'm a design researcher and I'd like to know about your world life view." It's not, those kind of direct communications will not be as successful. So that's because of a number of reasons. There's obviously power relationships involved between adults and children. Children are told to be seen and not heard. You speak when spoken to. And there's, of course, the additional relationship between a caregiver and a healthcare provider and the patient that puts the child in a subordinate role, and maybe they feel they're going to be dominated by being told what to do. And all of those aspects create additional barriers for communication. So as I started to work through this project, I realized that there had to be new tools in order to get the user on board and communicate these kinds of things that they'd be interested in. And so I knew that I had to come up with a new method, a new interview toolkit, if you will, when I was going into those settings in order to elicit that kind of information from the user. And so I started from the idea of grounded theory, meaning that I wasn't going to go into this project with a preconceived hypothesis of what was going to work. I really wanted the data from the child to bubble up and those children to indicate what they want, because it might not even be a garment after all. It might be a multiple diversity number of different artifacts or technologies or new healthcare systems that they need to address their needs. And in addition to that, taking the emic perspective. So in anthropology, there's two ways of looking at culture. There's the etic perspective, meaning the researcher looking into the culture and just doing observations. But then there's also the emic perspective, so the subject's worldview. How does this affect me? What is it going to do for my worldview? How do I feel about it? And so looking at medical anthropology, to really taking a meaning-centered approach from how these children interpret their lifestyle and what Dr. Arthur Kleiman calls their exploratory model, meaning how do they interpret their illness. Each person's expectation of illness is going to be socially and culturally defined by their experiences. So my experience as a cancer patient is going to be different than a person in rural Thailand's experience as a cancer patient. And so I really wanted to understand these children's self-perception, what their understandings of their illness was, what their thoughts on how it was interfering with their preferred lifestyle, and the awareness of their abilities. And so the means through which I was hoping to do that is through rapid ethnographic assessment. In classical anthropology, the ethnographer has the luxury of going into a culture for long term, and really being embedded in doing these longitudinal studies, but in a hospital setting that's not really convenient. You have limited time with the patients, And so I really needed to kind of come up with a means to do these rapid ethnographic assessments. And my research in child psychology and sociology informed me that arts-based methods was one of the means to elicit these open-ended interviews. So using arts-based methods, inspired by, again, Bruno Latour and the idea of drawing, means drawing people together. It creates this common language for understanding between the patient and the researcher. I developed a new interview toolkit based upon a simplified coloring book, a children's coloring book, so things that they're already identified with, and what I refer to as context stickers. So some of the earlier research in child psychology and cognitive development indicated that, from Martin Crampon and Raleigh Silver, that if you use what's called stimulus drawings to initiate conversation, it becomes a springboard for understanding. And so I went back to Otto Neroth's isotopes that were developed in the 1930s as a helping language for people to transcend the rebuilding of Europe, and use that as a means to develop a context sticker menu based on different potential contexts and locations that the children might be interacting with. And so what you see down this one axis, we have school, we have home, we have different concepts for play, and then the activities and accessories that might be associated with those. And the idea here is that this would be a flexible menu that they could utilize and indicate where they would want modifications. Maybe their house doesn't look like that, it's a two-story versus a single story, or that they want additional icons included. So it would be a flexible and adaptable menu that they could then give feedback on. And the other thing about using a black and white simplified menu is that the purpose was to be non-demographic specific, so that it would be create commonality amongst all children. So you see here an expanded version of that. And then they would be applying these stickers on the coloring workbook. So you have first the All About Me page, and the idea is that the students would then start plugging the stickers in different contexts. And the data is not so much about the finished product, the collage that they're putting together, but the conversations that are taking place during the process of them creating that. And from there we'd have a compare-contrast as they discuss, okay, now we've laid out my preferred lifestyle. How does that change when your healthcare condition is interjected into that situation? So just to sum up, what we've been talking about today is a project that I've been working on for my research. I have the pleasure of going in, when I get back to Dallas, it's actually into the hospital situation where I'm going to be testing this with their pediatric diabetes patients. But my starting point was, how can we come up with new ways to elicit information from children when developing biomedical technologies aimed at helping them with their illness. So thank you very much.
Perfect time. I need my Bronchi poster. So any questions?
Becca.
Hi Barbara, excellent talk. I'm just wondering about the age range of children you're working with, and whether you have to have different resources for particular ages of children, or whether you're just looking at a particular age range.
Well, based on cognitive development theory, looking at Piaget and Anna Freud, I focused on children between the ages of 8 and 10, because the research indicates that that's when concrete thinking is really starting to come together, and in addition to that, that's where the child is really starting to reach out and gain a sense of independence. And I also planned for that particular age group, it's kind of before puberty, where you have all sorts of physiological changes which will be intersected into the research. So really focusing on this age group to give the feedback about what they want to do for the rest of their life, if you will.
Great, thank you.
Did you test all of your methods? I've tested it with non-diabetic patients.
Okay, and what were the results?
So some of the feedback was, what happens when you have a child who is like a male, not interested in working in the 2D, but is really more into the tactile? And so do I need to bring additional elements to the toolkit like clay or bricks or things of that nature, other ways in which to communicate so that we don't get into a situation where they open up and they just shut down because I'm not going to use stickers and that's a girl's toy. And for the first phase of the research, I'm sticking with just the tools that I have because I didn't want to get into a situation where I'm comparing, in a sense, out of the box, clay versus bricks versus the stickers. I wanted really to see does this toolkit give us any information about the lifestyle that's going to inform a medical device?
And do you get any information about the lifestyle?
Yeah, using this method, they lay out the stickers and they talk through my house. This is what I do in my house. I play these computer games or I play these kind of sports. Okay. So, in theory, it's going to work.
Okay, because there are other methods that you can use. For example, this is design props, and you can get similar information for children's life and experience with humans.
There was a really cool design prop that they showed in a presentation yesterday about a cube using for dementia, the memory cube. So that's something that I thought, wow, that's really cool. Maybe I could incorporate it. Maybe we can follow up after the presentation, and I can learn from your presentation about additional tools.
Designing design props for children with advantages. Sorry about this.
No.
I was just wondering how this information I imagine it helps a lot in developing the treatment for kids. Maybe adjusting how doctors are open for this, not so much.
I came with my proposal to the hospital with if we back up the few slides about, let's see, I'll just go back. But, this notion about improving communication for all the parties involved, and I'm particularly working with the Child Life Division at the hospital, which is their extended care unit, if you will. These are for long-term patients that they're going to be working with. And the idea that they've really glommed onto is that here's the potential for increased self-knowledge and empowerment on the part of the child. And, really retooling the mindset about not just hearing from, the mom and dad and saying, these are the kind of issues we're having with Johnny, but finding out from Johnny himself, what does he want to have changed? He may not care that he has diabetes, and he wants, to do something else with these technologies altogether. And so how do we make those two components fit together? But the hospital, at least initially, has signed on because they're looking at it from a perspective as this is long-term, new methods to improve communication of all parties involved.
Just one last question, if
Yeah.
that's okay, from John.
Hi, Barbara. Thank you. Really great presentation. And I think what you've done is actually you're responding to the challenges we have in healthcare around how we do empower young people. And we talk about it all the time in healthcare about how we can do that. But what you're doing is doing beautifully developed methods drawn from the literature that actually have practical application. So these are things that people can actually take and use. And there are other methods around, clearly, but I think you've really clearly articulated why you chose this particular approach with children. So I'm just congratulating you.
Thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to see if it works.
Thank you.
Thank you.